Hi, I'm Sid, CEO and co-founder at GitLab, and today I'm going to talk with David about scaling an open core remote startup. David, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am David. I am the co-founder of a new company that I've just co-founded with a friend of mine, and we are basically building a visual coding tool that allows people to build complex websites and apps. So we've only just started, and we're very young, and we're just really interested to find out how GitLab has been so successful in building an open core model on top of a completely open, completely remote workforce. So to start us off, I'd be really interested to hear how employees react to applying to a 100% remote company, if they have any concerns, or if if anyone's ever said no, I just won't work for you if I have to work remotely, or just people's general feelings as you've attempted to hire fantastic developers from all over the world.
Yeah, so there's lots of people who are like applying to us, but they have questions about being all remote. And biggest concern, I think, is that it will be lonely, or that they won't get the support they need, or that they'll feel kind of disenfranchised. But I rarely get those questions. By the time an applicant is kind of at me, they've asked a couple of people in the company and they got comfortable with it. So I deal a lot with executive hiring. Every single executive hire that expressed that as a concern got comfortable with it after talking to the other executives. I think a big worry in the back of people's mind is that it's not very social because it's remote. But like I'm on Zoom calls like the entire day, and I can see your face, I can see your expressions, I can hear your audio. Like it's 80% as good as meeting in person. It's not like an audio conference, which is like 20% as good as meeting in person, or text, which is just a completely different way of communicating. So I think everyone gets comfortable with it, and we rarely miss out on people that apply because they didn't get comfortable. Of course, there might be people who never apply because it's like not their thing. For example, my wife, she likes going to the office, hang out there, and she'll still not consider a job here for various reasons. Also because I work here, I couldn't even hire her. But those applicants probably we never see.
Cool, interesting. Have you ever found that, or just in your experience, have you found that productivity has changed? Has it been better, do you feel, because you're remote, or worse? Or do people appreciate the freedom that it gives them? So perhaps they work a bit harder, or they put in a bit more effort, or take greater ownership of products or the company's pipeline?
Yeah, I think people end up with a bit more spare time. So if you compare us to like a typical Silicon Valley startup, we did that for 3 months, lived in the same house in a single room, and got a lot done. I think we still get a lot done. I think in the old scenario, there was more kind of peer pressure. We worked longer hours. I think now there's less interruptions. There's more structure around the work. So we can achieve the same with fewer hours.
Interesting. I've always wondered, do you have any data on if you've been able to hire a more diverse workforce by offering this remote setup, particularly in terms of perhaps people who aren't just like 25 and straight out of college, but have families, perhaps women, minorities who aren't typically available in your classical tech hubs, London, New York, Berlin, et cetera, San Francisco?
Yeah, I think we have. Now, that's not to say that our diversity numbers are great. We started off with a lot of people from the open source community, which was not very diverse. But for sure, you get many cultures, like just by virtue of having people in more than 50 countries. So that helps, and that gives a certain like racial diversity as well. I think it's easier to combine a remote job with the rest of your life. Like if your kids have to stay at home, like you can take care of them. It's easier to combine. It's not this binary decision where you're just not available. You're just out and miles away from the people you care about. So I do think that for a lot of people, it's an important perk and allows them to combine their kids with the rest of their life.
Interesting. Do you recommend people keep like set office hours, or are they free to work as they please, and as long as they've completed the tasks that they've been asked to do? Is that cool with you guys, or is it more rigid?
So we don't require you to like be there in a set amount of hours. We do recommend you kind of communicate to others what your limitations are. So for example, there was a call on our company call this week, like, please put your working hours in Google Calendar. So when we schedule a meeting, we can accommodate your working hours. So we recommend people have boundaries that they respect, but we're not requiring you to be online for a certain time.
Interesting. So I used to work as an academic researcher for like 8 or 9 years, and that was a very diverse international community. And I always observed that people would work bizarre hours, and the people that worked the most bizarre hours oddly got the most done and produced the best results. I think one of the reasons that I wanted to have a remote working startup is because I've seen that model work better, whereby if you give people more freedom, I think they can think more creatively and have more time to deliver kind of on their terms, but within the company's overall goal. So that's just
I do agree. Like, we try to steer like for results. We don't care when you work. So you should work when it's good for you and when you feel like working. I've not seen great results with people that have super weird hours and that kind of shift their rhythm and things like that. I think most productive people at our company have a set schedule which they stick to. Like I tend to stop working around 6 o'clock, and I think that's healthy to have such a rhythm. Otherwise, I've seen a lot of people who have irregular schedules in companies before get burnout or things like that. So I wouldn't recommend it.
No problem, I agree. Just staying on the topic of productivity, have you noticed, and talent in general, have you noticed a difference in the applicants that you perhaps get from compared to San Francisco, London, and other places that you're able to hire from? Because obviously you can hire from anywhere on the planet within reason. Have you found the bars higher or lower in terms of talent and abilities and skill?
I think what we found is that for senior positions, so people that have been in the industry for a long time, you tend to gravitate more towards the Bay Area. So finding an intermediate developer, we're able to find that everywhere. We have recruiters in Africa. If you want to find an executive who's been like leading 100 people plus team for more than 5 years in this industry, that's much harder than you end up gravitating towards the Bay Area. So the seniority is a difference.
Interesting. And in terms of compensation, do you match salaries across continents or across countries, or is it a scale that you guys use?
We pay local wages, so we pay what's common in that market. So we look at the metro area where you're close to, and then we have a global compensation calculator. So that determines where you live, determines the compensation factor, and we adjust the salary for that.
It's interesting. Has anyone ever said, okay, I'm doing the same job as this person in San Francisco, yet I'm paid 40% less?
Not people at GitLab, because they know what the deal is. We put the compensation calculator on our vacancies. But especially on Hacker News, there's been a lot of talk about that. So recently we launched a blog post, why we pay local wages and why we do not pay the same for the same work, because you live somewhere else. And that outlined all our reasons. For example, underpaying people is bad, but also overpaying people is bad. It's not great if people stay in a job because you're paying a lot more than they could get otherwise, and they're not happy. So that blog post was actually very well received, and since then I think it quieted down with the people bringing this up. I think it's a very counterintuitive thing, as same job, same pay makes logical sense. But if you look at the two models, I think paying market is superior.
Yeah, interesting. So we touched on briefly before we started this call the tools that guys use to communicate remotely. I just wondered if you could perhaps go over them, list ones you've tried and love, and ones you've tried and you think are awful, and just like give an overview of how you kind of manage. I think you're 400 people now, and kind of glue all of these people together in a successful, coherent structure.
Yeah, so we're 500 people now, and the women at GitLab communicate via Zoom, via Slack, via GitLab issues, GitLab merge requests, and Google Docs.
And you find they all kind of work together. You haven't missed having a lack of a centralized platform because you're switching between 3 or 4 different mediums.
I think we're very clear on what we use for what. So we have pretty extensive communication guidelines, which you can easily Google. And for example, I just added that if we're in a Zoom call, we're not going to use chat. We use a Google Doc. I can list the reasons, but it's has a better threading model than just chronologically.
Yeah.
So we're very attuned to like how we communicate, how we send calendar invites, what is linked in there, etc. And we try to use each medium to the maximum. For example, we had a group conversation today. People Ops presented, and it was a great presentation, great slide deck. But they're not presenting the slide deck because it's a meeting, and a meeting should be interactive. That's why we're all coordinating to have the same time. You want to give a presentation, that's great. Record it on YouTube, send it out to everyone. People can watch it at 2x at their leisure. So we're trying to like use the best things about every single tool that we use, and we try not to have duplicate tools.
Do you record every single meeting, or is it selectively done based on the own preference of the person leading the meeting?
Yeah, it's the preference of the person. We do encourage it, and especially encourage them to also publicize them, but it's certainly not enforced. And for the majority of meetings right now, it doesn't happen. So still also a change that we're going through as a company.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of the hedge fund, but there's a hedge fund that records absolutely everything that they do, all voice and video.
Yeah, Bridgewater, Ray Dalio.
Yeah, and they allow them to rate, the person speaking and provide live feedback in past tense. I think that's a really interesting idea, but the problem is, I think, integrating it in a way that includes people and doesn't just turn into a slanging match saying, oh, no, you're no good at this because you took too long to explain something and whatnot. So I think it's really interesting if you could do something along those lines, because I've noticed people like continuous improvement and getting better. And as long as the feedback's positive and you allow people to get better, I think they're far more receptive to essentially being rated by their own co-workers in that way. It's a very difficult balance, I think, to get right.
Yeah, and it seems that they got them right. When I read about it in the AppSec, I thought, this is probably a bit too much. And you can also like weaponize it a bit, where like give someone very underserved negative feedback, and then they're like, what are you saying? And you're in denial and stuff like that. But I talked to a few people who work there, and they were like, no, it's not abused that much. It actually works well. And so they've been able to pull that off, which is a lot more than we can say. Yeah,
that's interesting. Cool. So just moving on a bit to kind of how you guys started and the process you went through in raising money. So we're in the process of talking to and approaching venture capitalists, and a frequent theme we hear is, okay, we kind of like you guys, but we're not so hot on the remote stuff. We don't really understand it, and to us it just looks like a bit of a risk. So I just wondered if you came across this kind of same, gentle pushback from VCs who kind of want you to be in the same central hub as them for whatever reason, and how you overcame that.
Yeah, we had exactly the same problem. A lot of the reasoning is they invest in the company, and VCs don't want to lose their principal. Like, they don't want to lose all their money. And it's a bit irrational, because they also, the returns are made on the home runs, on the exceptional ones. The problems with their LPs are for the ones where they lost all their money. Yeah. So it is something that they want to optimize for. And then if you don't do super well as a company, you get sold. And it's much easier to sell a co-located company than a remote one. If you're in the Bay Area, you have a few people, it's easier to, they got their companies that are doing well, and they'll just make sure it gets acquired. So that option, that escape hatch, is either not available or at like a 50% discount for an all remote company. And that's a big part of their hesitation. The other thing is, name all remote companies that IPO'd. There are none. Now, hopefully WordPress, Envision, hopefully GitLab, but none yet. And that's what they're going for. Those are their home runs. So I think it's getting a lot better. I think with Envision and GitLab being above $1 billion, and WordPress as well, they're starting to see the model works and scales.
And how did you go about convincing them that this was right for your company? Was it just a relentless series of meetings where you convinced them based on your metrics and your traction, or was it more of a philosophical, this is the best way to build a company, full stop?
Yeah, so many times we didn't get the opportunity. Many times they just looked at it and they just passed on us. One very good investor said, look, I like everything about this company except the all remote. You check all our other boxes, but guess what? Like we get enough deals that check all boxes. So I'm not going to take this risk. I'm not saying this doesn't work. I'm just saying it's not what we commonly see, and we can just pattern match and get those companies. So why take the risk? Like they're such a good investor. They get every deal in the valley comes by. So that was a really honest way and a really valid way in which we got the client, and respect that a lot. With August Capital, who did our B round, and that was the point where it was most controversial, because the earlier round, we were still like, hey, we're going to do an office. And the later round, you got more financial data. So it's an easier decision. So the B round was essential. And what was great, it was that Vili Ilchev, their investor, said, look, I like everything except for this all remote. Convince me. So I went to their office, and they had like 5 people in there. I made a whole presentation about why remote scales a lot better. I was like, yeah, okay. And then I talked about like we document things. And then Avi, one of their associates, said, yeah, they really document stuff. I went online, I read their handbook, and I kind of spent the whole night reading because there's so much in there and it was so interesting. And that's where it clicks. Like, wow, we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk, and we're better. We got our stuff together better than other companies. And I think that was the essential moment to convince them.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience with your handbook. I started reading it, just skimming over it, and I think I spent like 2 hours reading through it, which is bizarre because it's just so unusual to read something that's so detailed and well thought out. I can completely understand how it convinced them. Just as a young company starting out, would you recommend to go remote based on the challenges that you're likely to face with VCs, or do you think it's something that you can overcome if you're the right team with the right product?
Yeah, I think right now it's a bit of a personal preference. Like, what do you like more? If you're like my wife and you like going to the office, then probably don't do it. But I think the VC penalty is getting less and less very rapidly. I think they're seeing that it works. And also, the Bay Area just gotten more expensive and more expensive. So like, where are you going to put the company? If you're going to put it here, the costs are just spiraling out of control. So they're starting to see the cost benefit as well. So I think make the decision that's best for the company. Don't do it for the VCs. Like, probably life advice, just don't do stuff that it's an afterthought. Just VCs, taxes, whatever. First do what you should do, and then try to see how you can optimize the fundraising or the tax process, but don't make decisions based on it.
Cool. That was really interesting. Thank you. So just moving on to discussing how you came to become an open core company. Perhaps you could just outline the process that you went through in deciding that, and then how you now decide what parts are open and what parts are closed, and how that intersection works. And I'd be really interested to hear too, if the decision process that you go through now when you decide what's open and what's closed has changed as you've grown as a company, and you need to deliver greater revenue growth to hopefully sustain your valuation?
Yeah, so we GitLab started as an open source project, and we tried every model to keep it all open source. We tried donations in the beginning. Dimitri called it ice cream money because it was $7 a month, enough for him and Ina to buy an ice cream. We got that up to $1,000 a month, which was not enough to sustain either of us. We tried consultancy to help people install and upgrade GitLab. But as we did that, we learned how to improve the documentation so people didn't need our help anymore. So as we got ourselves out of, worked ourselves out of a job. We tried support, and people bought it for the first year, but then they didn't file any issues because the software works pretty good and documentation is good. And then they didn't renew. We tried paid development, where it was like, we develop a feature for you.
Yeah.
But it was a bit of a coordination problem, but also they had preferred vendors. So they were like, yeah, we can pay you, but we also have this Java programmers who will contribute it. And we ended up spending a lot more time like fixing the contributions of those people, but without getting paid. So that wasn't great. So we settled on licensed software, open core, add extra features that you pay for, which is the most successful model for open source, open core companies. And licensed software just has amazing margins of like 90% plus, which makes it a great way to grow a startup fast. Then what features do you charge for? So we tried a few models. We tried to say, hey, features that are more likely to be used by a large company are paid. That was really hard to determine. We pointed at features, and then we're going to start up saying, well, I want to use this too. And you make me pay big company prices. This is so unfair. And it wasn't very predictable. So we now settled on a new model we call buyer-based open core. And whether the feature is open source or proprietary depends on who uses it. If it's an individual contributor, it's open source. If it's a manager, it goes in our good plan. If it's a director, it goes in our better plan. And if it's an executive, it goes in our best plan, our most expensive plan. And that's been working really well. And that's for a couple of reasons. One of them is like individual contributors are more likely to contribute features back. And it's easier to contribute to something that's already open source. It's less awkward. You want to have the contribution also be open source afterwards. And the executives, the features they care about, they're willing to pay up for. They have budget authority and they can afford that. I gave a much more extensive version of this at the Open Source Leadership Summit recently, where you can watch that presentation or read the slide deck.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult balance to kind of match when you're first starting up, because you often don't get these conversations with very senior people and you're kind of just selling blind almost. I'd be interested in hear if you've ever had something as part of your open core and then taken it out because you've decided it is something that enterprise will pay substantial sums for.
Yep. One of our stewardship promises is that we'll never do that. So we never did that.
Yeah, that's good. Just following on from that, there's been a fairly lively debate in the open source community about licenses and what license to use for what project, and if you're going to screw yourself if you use the wrong license and a cloud provider takes your own project and delivers it as a service essentially, and undercuts you. So you're published, I think, under an MIT license. Have you ever considered using something more restrictive, like a common clause is something that's gained a small amount of traction? I think Redis Labs switched to that. I think MongoDB has just switched to a more restrictive license too. Is that something you can ever see yourself doing, or is it just against your general philosophy?
Yeah, we're very proud that it's an open source license, an MIT license right now, and not one of the licenses that Redis or Mongo or Confluent did. However, we understand and we sympathize with like the need for those companies to have a sustainable business model, and that is getting harder in the age of hyperclouds, offering their the open source is a managed service.
Mm.
So we might change it in the future, but for now, we have not needed to do so. And one of the reasons is we think the buyer-based open core model that makes it a bit more resistant to kind of the fork and commoditize that Amazon did to, for example, Elasticsearch.
Yeah. Have you ever had any customers come to you after using the open source version and then upgrading to the enterprise plan? Is that your most common way to generate sales?
Yeah, that's a common way. A lot of inbound generates from that, but we discovered we had to augment it with an active sales effort. What tends to happen is that there's a bottoms-up adoption of GitLab, but it kind of gets stuck in middle management, where the middle management has created their own kind of preferred tool chain of all kinds of different things, and they spend a lot of engineering years on integrating all of that. And since GitLab is a substitute for that, where you share that burden with the rest of the industry and having to do it yourself, it's not a very intuitive thing. So we then tend to talk to like the top of the company and do a top-down sales process where we do a proof of concept and prove out that it's better than trying to make something on your own. Both because we get to spend a lot more time on it as a community, like you're sharing the effort with 100,000 other organizations, and because a single application is way better than 10 different applications that you stitch together.
Yeah, cool. Something I hadn't really thought about was how you approach integration with big enterprise clients. Is it pretty much they just take what they're given and they integrate it, or do you have to provide support to integrate it within their workflows and systems?
Yeah, we do provide a lot of like customer success, implementation services, technical account managers, things like that. Yeah. Sometimes it's with the migration. 30,000 repos need to be converted from GitHub or Bitbucket, and we help with that. Sometimes it's training people, giving workshops on modern DevOps best practices. Sometimes it's like training on GitLab itself. Sometimes it's like setting up CI shared runners or other things. Sometimes it's a review of the infrastructure and the way they set it up. So very diverse, but we're rapidly growing there and hiring a lot of people for our customer success team.
Cool. I'd be interested to hear to how you approach enterprise sales. Again, this is something that I don't have a huge amount of experience in. So how did you start your sales force, and what was the decision to hire your first salespeople? Was it driven by you guys just not being able to handle it, or was it something your investors insisted on based on terms of investment? Just the general process that you now go through to go from your pipeline to close deals and revenue growth.
Yeah, so this all started before any investment. We were still bootstrapped at that time. I think the first sales hire was kind of inside sales, kind of more like SMB sales, where people we had inbound requests and he helped them with getting the license and the payment and talking to plans. Our first strategic account leader, like an enterprise salesperson, field salesperson, was Hayden McKay. He worked at a competitor at the time, and he reached out because he saw his customers kind of also running GitLab and converting more and more to GitLab. But we still kind of dated for 3 months, where we had calls every 2 weeks or something. Because it's a big risk joining a startup.
Yeah.
And then he joined, and it takes a while to kind of get going. So in the beginning, it was kind of slim pickings. Like, I don't think he made his quota in the first year. So that's rough because like that's your income. So you get a base, but the nice things in life you can do with the extra money. So, but he persisted, and he started growing, and the product started getting better. We got better at communicating it. We got better at selling it. And from then on, I think second year was very, very successful. And now he's a regional director at GitLab.
Cool. Did you find the feedback from sales in the early days was valuable, more so than perhaps the feedback from the open source community?
It's all valuable. So we listen to everything, but it's certainly that sales surfaces some problems that you would not hear from through other channels. For example, we really had to up our like single sign-on game on GitLab.com.
Cool. I'd be really interested to hear. I think you moved to San Francisco. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I just on a high level, I'd just be interested to hear the rationale for that. If you feel the ecosystem is better in San Francisco for you to operate from compared to Europe.
Yeah, I think it is. We moved there for Y Combinator, so that's why I moved to the US, and that was certainly very helpful for like a technical team. You learn a lot about sales and marketing, and you learn a lot about ambition from like the other startups and about iterating fast. So it was really helpful. And then we raised money afterwards, and that kind of means that you then have to stay there. Like that people are going to invest in an American startup, which means not just the entity, but also that the CEO is here the majority of his or her time. And since then, I've stayed here. I think I've read a tweet recently. The technology world, wherever you live, the technology world will be on Pacific time. Like the conferences are here, the other companies are here, the industry analysts are here, etc. So a lot of people are here and work on this time zone. And I still do a lot of meetings on average. We have kind of more than one meeting a day in person. So I think it's a big benefit to be here as like the leadership of a company.
Interesting. How did YC take the remote working startup aspect? Were they completely okay with it? Or was it just never?
Yeah, so for YC itself, you have to be co-located. You have to kind of move in close to the Mountain View campus. So that's very, very definitely not remote. And then they said, look, this remote thing, we've seen it before. It works for engineering, but not for sales and marketing. So get an office, which is what we did. We got an office. It's just that people kind of stopped showing up because they could just as well work from home.
Interesting. Did you enjoy the NYC process? Do you think it was worthwhile?
I really enjoyed it. It was super worthwhile. And if it wasn't for YC, we'd be a company with like 30 people by this time. And we would not be in the race for this industry and category.
Cool. Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned, but me and my co-founder met on Entrepreneur First in Europe, which is probably 2 stages before YC consider and take companies. It's really a talent invest in people. It just takes a couple of hundred people every 6 months, and says them come up with an idea for a company, and we'll fund you if we like you after 6 months. So I think that was also a really good experience, just in terms of learning the language of VCs, investors, and the network that you create too. Just fantastic. So that was definitely a really good experience. Just my final question now, because I realize how valuable your time is, and you've been really helpful so far. I'd be interested to hear your general thoughts on how the open source landscape is going to change within the next 10 years. I think it's changed quite substantially in the last 10 years. I think it's become far more mainstream and understood in terms of how to build business models around it. And I just wondered if you thought that would change, or if it would go back ever to a closed source model being the preferred solution, particularly based on the cloud providers and the liberal use of licensing.
Yeah. You had the very early open source, which was very idealistic. And then you had the first commercial open source like MySQL, Red Hat, very unique business models. Then you had this like current wave of commercial open source software companies, very similar, all open core. And now you have this development of the hyperclouds also entering the game. So it's going to be super interesting to see how that evolves. So far, most of the big commercial open source software companies have changed their license to a closed source license. So that is happening. I wonder how that will play out, whether these so-called non-compete licenses, whether that will become the standard for commercial open source software, or whether it will turn out that there's other ways to kind of deal with the hyperclouds. And Amazon has made a very bold and move with the fork and commoditize that they did with Elasticsearch. I think it's a smart move. It's in the interest of their customers, but there's going to be a response. So it's going to be interesting to see maybe a commercial open source software companies get closer to other industry players because of that. So I don't know how that's all going to work out. So far, we're still the code that is open source, not closed source, and we'll try to keep it that way. But we won't hesitate to make changes as we need to. I do think that like the general trend, if you zoom out a bit, is that for any software that is common across the entire software industry, it's much more likely to be open source in the future than proprietary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Have you ever had any issue with Amazon or Google cloning GitLab or forking GitLab and offering it as a service? I don't know if they do that. I've never looked.
No, we didn't. I think we had a fork. It's years and years ago. I think the person was really passionate about translating GitLab. But now we have a translated version of GitLab. It's not complete yet, but there's lots of efforts put into making sure that it's localizable and in many places.
Cool. Well, that was really, really useful. If you have any questions you'd like to ask me about anything, about what we're doing or
maybe it's good for people that got curious to hear a bit about your startup. Yeah,
sure. So basically, it's born out of frustration that both me and my co-founder experience, where if you're doing any type of web or front-end development or even back-end development, you kind of have the system where you're confronted with a variety of different technologies that compete together, and you essentially, as a developer, end up gluing things together. And our theory was that the glue is the annoying hard part that no one wants to do, and people actually just want to write code themselves. So as a base model, we're trying to develop something that allows developers to glue together different components in a very easy and quick way. And then we came to the conclusion that the platform we built would be very, very easy to adapt to non-technical users to then style, customize, expand, design different components and different web and mobile apps in a much more complex way than you get with app builders like Wix presently. So it's really about kind of democratizing the process of creating software. And I think we're trying to start from the position whereby if you start from a base point about how software would be created if software had never been created up until this point, you can create completely new frameworks and design patterns that allow the development process to be substantially speeded up with better outcomes and more stable code that doesn't require this kind of constant bug fixing, modification, et cetera, et cetera. So we're basically building a machine intelligence platform that can find bugs in whatever you're doing and then modify it, fix it. And we hope that this will enable both programmers and non-programmers to kind of coexist in this world where you kind of presently have designers, product managers, product owners, customers, and then developers at the end. And we think if we can kind of unify these people into a single entity, we can develop something that's fundamentally changes how software is created.
Cool. And if people want to know more, where should they go?
They can go to our website, which is scaleup.app. And I don't think there's a lot on there at the moment, but there will be soon because we're presently in the process of updating it. But yeah, in the next 6 months, we hope to have a stable version of the end product whereby you can actually build very complex web and mobile apps and customize them however you wish, just by writing simple modules and then integrating them.
Cool. Thanks for the interview.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.